One. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is McKaylee. I work at Tattered Cover Bookstore. And first and foremost, I want to say thank you. Thank you for shopping locally. Thank you for supporting local independent bookstores. It means the world to us. We would not have survived the last year or the last 50 years without you and without your support, because that's right, it is Tattered Cover's 50th anniversary here in 2021, which is an incredible feat for a bookstore. So thank you. We owe a large part of that to you, our virtual community and our in-person community, which we're slowly but surely starting to get back into. So we appreciate that more than you know. Before I go any further, I want to let you know that closed captioning is enabled on this video for those who might want it or need it. There's a black bar at the bottom of the screen with a button labeled CC on it. If you click that button, closed captioning is enabled should you want it or need it. And a little bit about Tattered Cover Bookstore for those who might be joining us that are outside of our area, as is per usual in virtual world. But Tattered Cover is a local independent bookstore in Denver, Colorado, with 4 locations, soon to be 5. We have our Stanley Marketplace location opening up in like 10 days or so, and we just did the soft opening of our McGregor Square location, which was a move for one of our other ones. So come check out our new stores. You can find out more information by signing up for our email newsletter or following us on social media. And also online is where you can get all of your bookish needs. If you're unable to come into the store, don't want to quite yet, or just want to stay shopping in your pajamas, we can do that and accommodate all of those shopping desires and bookish needs at tatteredcover.com. Also on our website is all of our upcoming events. And oh my gosh, there's a lot. We have one later tonight at 6:30. We have one tomorrow at 2. There are so many meeting your needs. And if you want to check out any past events, you can look them up on our YouTube channel where all of our events are recorded previously. So make sure to do that. But the event that we have tonight, this is such a wonderful book. And I am personally very excited that we get to celebrate it here with Tattered Cover. It is Ly Tran's newest book, House of Sticks. And she's going to be in conversation with Beth Nguyen today, and we're so excited to have them both. And so a little bit about our guests this evening. Beth is the author of Stealing Buddha's Dinner, the novel Short Girl and Pioneer Girl, and the forthcoming memoir, Owner of a Lonely Heart. She's received an American Book Award and a Penn Gerard Award, and her work has appeared in the New Yorker, the Paris Review, the New York Times, and numerous anthologies. She teaches in a creative writing program at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And Ly graduated from Columbia University in 2014 with a degree in creative writing and linguistics. She's received fellowships from MacDowell, Art Omi, and Yadao. And House of Sticks is her first book. And like I said, we have fans of this in our store, on our staff. We're very excited to celebrate this book with Ly and Beth today. So I'm going to go ahead and change my viewpoint over so everybody can see everyone else. Hello, all. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Hi all, I'm making sure, hold on real quick here. Remove spotlight. There we go. Now that everybody can see you. I had a technical glitch there. But hi Ly, hi Beth. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to pop out and let the two of you converse. I want to let everyone know, wow, you all are already so active in the chat. Thank you so much for that. There is a chat next to us on the screen. Lots of yays, lots of can't waits for the conversation, smiley faces. So please keep that up. If you have any questions, that's where you're going to be asking them for our Q&A portion with the audience later this evening. But for now, take it away, ladies.
Wow, thank you so much. Ly, hello. I'm so excited to be here. So excited about House of Sticks. I'm also really curious about what's going on in the other chat that we can't see.
I know. Yeah, it's such a shame.
What are they saying? Wow, I'm so honored to start this conversation with you about your beautiful book. I think that maybe you were going to read for a little bit of it for us tonight to begin.
Yes.
I would love that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I would love to read a chapter. I think it'd be best if I read the first chapter, which is called Awake, and it's my very first memory on this earth. A din of nervous voices, a shuffle of restless bodies, a dome of bright blue tarp. It was nighttime. I was hungry, fretful, struggling out of my mother's arms. My father had gone to trade a ceramic bowl with eggs for soy sauce. We sat on narrow, overcrowded benches waiting for him. My senses were just beginning to activate, some more than others. Vision dominated, and smell. I remember the strong odor of eggs drenched in soy sauce as my father entered the tent and carried the food back to us, and the vague presence of blurry, faceless people all around. I don't remember my three brothers being there. I knew only that we were not in a familiar place, and that shock of unfamiliarity is perhaps what has preserved this earliest memory of mine, sitting on a bench in a tarpaulin tent in a refugee camp in Thailand. I was 3 years old, only vaguely conscious of the world around me. But in that singular moment, it was as though a light had flickered on in the uncharted rooms of my mind. I have no recollection of the moments before, of how I got there, or of what came after. But the blue remains. I can almost touch it, a country of blue as big as Antarctica, frozen in the geography of my consciousness. And the eggs. I can still taste those eggs, rubbery whites infused with soy sauce and a creamy yolk at the center. I know from what my parents have told me in the years since that we stayed in that camp for 3 weeks. Then we boarded planes that took us from Thailand to Denmark, from Denmark to France, from France to America. From that time, I remember only hazy glimpses of airports and an isolated sensation of burning coldness, but nothing lasting, nothing of shape. My father tells me that on the plane ride from France to America, he'd awakened to find that I was gone. Panicked, he and my mother searched the plane, approaching the stewards and stewardesses in their broken English. Excuse me, where is baby? They cradled an invisible baby in their arms. Turns out, I had waddled down the aisle to an empty seat and curled up at its base to sleep. I, of course, have no recollection of this. I was asleep. But sometimes I think I remember it. I see myself as a toddler, walking down the aisle beneath the unseeing gaze of strangers. I remember dim lighting and a sudden sensation of dizziness, of crawling into a quiet, empty space. Then I feel strong arms encircle me and carry me back to my family. I feel the weight of sleep descend upon me once again. Thank you.
Oh, that was so beautiful. Lee, thank you for reading that and for beginning with that beautiful, powerful image, the plane and the eggs. It's such a perfect introduction to the sensory and imagistic journeys that you take us through in this book. And I have so many questions I could ask you. I'm fortunately going to leave time for questions from all of you out there. And thank you for joining us tonight. But I would love to begin with a question about the process of memoir writing, basically, which is kind of a broad question because memoir writing is such a huge thing. It sounds daunting. I mean, it is daunting. And so many of us who write end up writing it like by accident almost. Like I almost say like I ended up writing memoir more than I started writing it in a way. And a lot of us started in other genres, fiction, poetry. And so I'm wondering like how this happened for you, how did you come to memoir or how did memoir come to you? And, how did you know that this would be, or when this would be a book?
Oh, that's a good question. So I studied fiction at Columbia. So as you said, sometimes we start off in other genres and we just happen upon the genre of memoir writing. So I was studying fiction and I my second to last year in college, I realized that I didn't have enough credits to graduate the following year. So, which is not good to find out so late. But I took an outside course at NYU, and it was called Writers in New York. And I applied for the fiction part of that program. And on my first day, I didn't really jive with the professor. So I did something I never do, which is I wrote to the program director and made up a lie, a little white lie, saying that I accidentally bubbled in fiction when I meant nonfiction. Just because I didn't like the professor, and I felt like, I'm paying all this money for this course and I want to enjoy it. So she said, oh, sure, I can switch you over to nonfiction, no problem. And there I met Saeed Serafisade, who is a professor, an incredible memoirist and an incredible professor. And I just really so connected with him. And I emailed him some pages that I was working on in this other nonfiction seminar that came with the course. And he told me, I don't have time to read these pages. And so I said, oh, okay. It was a little disappointing. And he said, but you know what? Why don't you come to my office hours and we can chat about your goals as a writer? So I did. And I told him that I was planning on writing a novel one day, loosely based on my life. And he said, why is your life interesting? So, and I told him, I told him a little bit about my life as an immigrant, as a nail salon technician, and just the whole immigrant experience. And he said to me, oh my goodness, Lee, this is such a great story. I get manicures from time to time, and I often wonder about the life of a nail salon technician. And, best of luck on your journey. And I thought that was a really wonderful discussion. And I went home, and I can't remember if it was the next day or the next week, but his agent emailed me and said, dear Lee, Saeed forwarded us your pages. We would love to represent you. We love your writing. And by the way, this should be a memoir, not a novel. So it's a very long story. I apologize, but yeah, that's how I came. Yeah.
So then you had to write it.
Right, exactly. How could I say no?
Did that give you motivation?
It did. It was sort of it gave me a lot of confidence, but at the same time, there was a lot of pressure. Yeah. Because I think when I was first embarking on this journey, I didn't quite have the courage to tell my story as truth, which is probably why I gravitated towards fiction. But as I wrote, I found that courage.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic story. I love hearing how people arrive and because there's always so much work, man, and we can see all the work and the years of work that you put into becoming the person who is going to write this. And that's part of the, I think, joy of reading memoir is we get to see the path and the finished product almost at the same time, but we also know that's ongoing. A question about memoir that that people often ask, and I think it's a legitimate one, has to do with sort of the crafting of it in terms of how you decide what to focus on and how you decide what you end up leaving out. And most people who do write memoir end up writing many pages that don't make it into the book, and just sort of figuring out the structure. And this is chronological, which I think works really well and I think makes perfect sense. At the same time, even with chronology, you can't cover everything, nor are we supposed to cover everything. It's impossible and not really the goal of memoir. So how did you make those decisions about what to keep, what to focus on?
Yeah, so actually, I don't know if you know this, but the original conceit for the structure of this memoir was not chronological at all. And it was actually supposed to be structured through the steps of a manicure. So each section would be a step of a manicure, and the first section was remove old nail polish. Right. And it would be a set of chapters that would link thematically to each step. So for that particular step, I would focus on, sort of trying to understand my past and my parents' past, the the war-torn Vietnam that they came from, and trying to leave that past behind. So a process of removing old nail polish. And then the second step would be cut, file, and buffer nails. And those chapters were supposed to be a set of chapters all about assimilation into American society. So just trying to be uniform, trying to be like other kids. So, cutting and filing the nails to be uniform. And that structure was incredibly instrumental in helping me figure out the major themes and motifs of my memoir. But ultimately, it became sort of suffocating because the narrative itself grew beyond that, and it started to take on its own life. And I had to, make a really crucial decision one day to let go of that narrative structure so that I could let the memoir be what it was meant to be.
Wow, that is so fascinating. I love that. That makes sense. It's really weird though when you have, a plan, a structure, and then you have to undo your own plan.
Right. Yeah, it was one of the biggest lessons that I learned in writing this memoir was, I had to let go. It was really difficult because I first of all, I was really proud of myself for coming up with this clever structure. And then to let it go, it was sort of like, an arrow through the heart.
But you wouldn't have gotten here without that structure in the first place.
Right, exactly. So I
So,
think the structure is still very much embedded in it.
yeah, it makes so much sense now that you're saying that. Oh, okay. This is wonderful. You're also making me think about how when we write a book, no matter how many workshops we have taken, no matter how many books we've read, we have to sort of teach ourselves to write the book that we're writing because it's a new thing every time. So part of that also is giving ourselves permission to pursue the subject, especially when the subject is difficult, especially when we're talking about really intense, personal family issues and trauma and violence. So how did you teach yourself, to do this? And in what ways did you give yourself permission? Did you turn to books, other memoirs to give you permission? Did you have a lot of readers? What are some of the strategies you use to get yourself to figure out how to do this?
So, one of the first things I did was one of the first chapters I wrote was the last chapter of the book. And
Oh,
the reason I did that is because I said to myself that I wanted to write myself to that chapter, not just in my book, but in my own life. Because in many ways, when I was first starting on this journey, I was still emerging from darkness, and I was trying to figure out how to get on the other side of that darkness. And so that last chapter was sort of a goalpost for me. It's sort of like a beacon in the distance for me to work towards. And I knew that if I could just focus on that chapter, I could write myself to that place of light. And also going to other books and trying to figure out what my voice is and what voices resonated with me as well.
wow. I am so fascinated by this process. I don't think I've ever done anything like that. Like write the last thing, but it makes so much sense. And it also resonates with something that you say in your book about, your childhood self asking your mother, like, what if I'm the light? Which is so beautiful and so powerful. And it's an important question because yes, we are actually our own lights. And sometimes it just takes, many years to figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean that sort of Vietnamese aphorism that she would tell me. So she would say "Gang mực thì đen, gang đen thì sáng," which means if you're near ink, then you'll become stained, and if you're near the light, then you'll become bright. And so, I don't know how old I was, 5, 6, maybe older, but I was starting to get a little snarky. And I asked her, well, Mom, what if I'm the light? Because I mean, she said it to me to basically the lesson there was don't hang out with the bad kids in school because you'll there'll be a bad influence on you. But I was more concerned with being the influence myself. And, you know, I throughout my life, especially when times got tough, I would always revisit that aphorism and ask myself, you know, what if I'm the light? And that really played a role even in writing this book.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. It's beautiful too. And it was also a complicated moment because it was funny and sad at the same time, which I really admire. That sort of like, wait a minute, what if I'm the ink staining things? What if I'm the bad influence?
Yeah, for sure.
And there is a strong sense of, questioning, but also respecting what the parents are deciding, for the children and for their own lives. And I think that there's a real push and pull and a struggle that carries on throughout the book in a very powerful way that I think would resonate with anybody who's ever grown up, but also anyone who's ever experienced any kind of intergenerational conflict or understands the immigrant or refugee experience. One of the words that you mentioned with frequency in this book, which I think is really powerful, is the word failure. And I think it's powerful because it is a subject that we just don't talk about enough. Why failure is something to fear, why failure is something that we, conceal. But in fact, we all experience failure, like kind of a lot. And we oftentimes can't go anywhere without that kind of experience of failure. And I loved that you just would come right out and just say, like, is this going to be another failure? Am I going to fail at this? And just thinking about that as a concept, thinking about that as a narrative and guiding principle was really fascinating. I was wondering about that usage, as a theme, the idea of like structuring a narrative around the tension of, is this character going to make decision A or B based on the fear of failure?
Yeah, I think, as children of immigrants, we often have this idea that because of our parents' sacrifice, that there's almost no room for failure, because we see that our parents have done so much just to get their children to a place where they can be liberated, where they can reach their dreams. And I think for me, that pressure was just so strong as a child, seeing if not just for me, but for my brothers. But that pressure was further exacerbated by my need to see and not having the tools in order to do so. So when I was 8 years old, I was sent home from school with a note from the nurse saying that I needed glasses. And my father, because of his experience in the war and the trauma that he had sustained, said he thought that glasses were a government conspiracy to take away my eyesight. And so I think that launched me into a decade of feeling like I was a failure because I wasn't able to see the board in school, and just basically failed. And eventually I did fail. I dropped out of college. Now, what's interesting about that particular point in my life is that dropping out of college was my decision to fail. And before that, I was really reaching a point of a lot of anger and resentment at my parents for their neglect and failing to provide me with the glasses that I so desperately needed. And I spent so much time blaming them and resenting them until I reached the point where I didn't want that for my life anymore. I didn't want to blame. And I was so I felt like I was out of control. And I thought the only way for me to take back control was to fail on my own terms. So I made this very pivotal decision to drop out of college because I thought that if I could fail on my own terms, then I could succeed on my own terms as well. And I think, I owe a lot of my success to that decision.
Oh, I love that. That is, and it ties so well with what I was going to ask about this next, with the theme of eyesight and vision, which is, that is the source of so much emotional tension throughout this book. And I was so worried, when I'm reading this, I was so worried about this, but young Lee, like, she can't see the board, she, like, her eyes are getting worse. How is she going to function in gym class? And how is she going to walk down the street? There's so much worry. And when you were talking about that with failure, it reminded me of a eye doctor's appointment I had like a couple of weeks ago, where the eye doctor said to me, I've had many eye doctor's appointments because I have, my eyes are not great at all, and I wear contacts. And he suddenly said to me, he's a new eye doctor, he suddenly said to me, stop answering like this is a test. This is not a test that you're going to fail. And I was like, damn, no one's ever said that to me before, but it's so true. It's like, that is true. I've always approached those eye exams like it was a test that I was going to fail. And it was like, there's actually no sense of failure because your eyes are what they are.
Right. Yeah. And I remember, I mean, that the test that led the nurse to write me that note was, a source of a lot of just anxiety, because I thought, oh my goodness, I failed another test. And, at the end of the day, for me at least, to think about life in those terms is very limiting, right? And so I wanted to liberate myself from that sort of thinking, and to take on a sort of a growth mindset that it's okay to fail. And I think part of, or one of the messages in this book is that basically that it's okay to fail, and that's how we grow.
Yeah, I agree. It's sometimes hard to explain it, but you show it so beautifully. And the process of it is very tender, and I think that's something that I really admire about your book, is the way that you bring tenderness to yourself and to the depiction of your past self. And I think that is something that we can all learn from as readers, and possibly as writers. Anyone who's a writer, you can learn from this how to write about your past self with complexity and tenderness, all at once.
Thank you.
Beautiful. So now that you've done this, when you look back, which, writing a book takes a lot of time, often more time than people can imagine. Do you think that you learned something now that just in the process of just looking back at that whole process, like, what have you learned from that whole thing that you didn't expect that you were going to learn?
Oh, so many lessons. Well, here's a funny story. So, throughout the process of writing this, what made it challenging was that I was still living the life that I was writing about. So I hadn't, a lot of times when people write memoirs, they're already in a better place. Whereas, yes, I did graduate from Columbia, but I moved back home to the same apartment building that I immigrated to 28 years ago. And there was a hole in my ceiling, and so whenever it rained, it would rain inside my apartment. It was just a complete mess. And to further complicate things, I have a very complex relationship with my parents, but throughout the process of writing this memoir, my parents actually live upstairs on the third floor. So not only did they live upstairs metaphorically in my mind, but they also lived upstairs physically. And so that made, gaining whatever distance I needed to gain in order to write this memoir very, very difficult. But throughout it, I learned to reclaim my voice, and to not even reclaim, but to find it, and to find it amidst all this chaos that was happening. And I think it has taught me to be proud of myself, which is something I very rarely allowed myself to be.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful. And because your book spans, years, your whole life, basically, you characterize a lot of different, not just your family, a lot of different people, your brothers, your parents, people in school, your friends. Are you finding that they're reaching out to you?
Oh, absolutely. But all the comments that I've received, from basically everyone has been what any memoirist would like to hear, which is, wow, you portrayed this so accurately. It's as I remembered it. And that means so much to me, especially, uh, trauma teaches you to doubt yourself a lot of times. And so many times throughout the process of writing this memoir, I doubted the veracity of my memories.
Mm.
Um, but at the same time, I didn't reach out to anybody to confirm those memories, because I also wanted to give myself permission to tell my story the way that I remembered it, the way that I experienced it, without anybody's input to manipulate that version of reality for me.
Right. I think that is really one of the trickiest things about writing a memoir that you just touched on, that it's your one person's version of events. And so there's that question of that we balance in our minds of like, what do we owe? What do we owe the story? What do we owe ourselves? What do we owe readers? Who's this for? And I think that, to me, that's like a big question that I try not to think about, when I'm writing, which is like, who's this for? What is the audience? Like, who's going to read this?
Right.
Did you ever have to think about that?
I think, yeah. And what in the beginning, when I was hesitant to write this memoir, one thought that crept up in my mind again and again, and became louder and more visible over time, was the thought that maybe there is another little girl out there in the world who experienced, or is currently experiencing, or has experienced what I went through, and is questioning whether, she is to be believed, is questioning the accuracy of the events in her mind, or whether she imagined it. And because that's what I went through when I was a child, when I was experiencing these things. And I always thought, oh gosh, like, am I the only person who's going through this? Is there something wrong with me? And so when I sat down to write this memoir, I thought of that little girl, and I just poured all of my heart and soul into this, to write it for her.
That's really lovely. And, there are, we know that there are so many of those little girls, so many children, so many readers ready, and that they need this. They don't know yet, but they'll need this. And I feel that way about so many books, and everything we get to read is window or door, and therefore just a huge privilege. And this is for me too, and for anyone who gets the chance to read this. It's an opening.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I remember in the ninth grade when I read Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. I mean, that just really, I connected so much to that book, because Pecola Breedlove was a little girl yearning for a pair of new eyes. I mean, granted, it was a pair of blue eyes, but for me, also a little girl yearning for a pair of eyes, it so resonated with me. And I think that was the first time when I truly felt the power of literature, to connect us all, and to reveal our humanity. And I wanted to also be able to do that for others one day.
Well, you absolutely do. And so thank you for that. I know that we're about to move on to audience Q&A, but I also just want to assure you that Keanu Reeves, who has been overseeing this conversation, and indeed my entire pandemic Zoom life, I can assure you that he approves. He's just sort of like channeling that approval to me, and love and appreciation as well. Is that right? Yes, love and appreciation from
Oh,
Keanu.
we love Keanu Reeves.
That's a lovely note to end your conversation on before we move to the audience Q&A. Having special guest Keanu Reeves here is a huge deal. So thank you so much for that. It's very appreciated. I honestly feel like that myself and the audience could let the two of you go on for another 3 hours. You're asking such wonderful questions, Beth, and Ly. Your honesty and your vulnerability shows not only in the book, but in the conversation as well. And so it's such a treat to listen to. Thank you. I want to quickly let everyone know that this is time for audience Q&A. If you have any questions for Ly, Beth, about the process, whatever you'd like to ask, please do so in the chat next to the screen that you're watching us on right now. To get us started, some of the comments you both were asking about earlier. Jacqueline Cortez says, so excited, go Ly. So amazing. She's definitely a light. Tracy said, can't wait for this conversation. We've got Luis Reyes. So proud and happy for you, Ly. Can't wait to read your book. Yay, Ly. So proud of you, Ly. Like, there's all these, it's just amazing comments and so much heart and so much love. So I want to make sure that I read a lot of them, but lots of hearts, exclamation points, and happy smiley faces. So lots of love there.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this one's really interesting. Is a start with, where did you start as a memoirist in your book? And what do you advise other people to do when writing a memoir?
Where did I start? I started with that I wrote that chapter that I sent off to Saeed Serafizadeh. So that was really the first chapter, and then the last chapter is another chapter that I wrote towards the beginning. But I think my advice is to let the book breathe, to let the book be what it wants to be, and to give yourself permission to tell your story the way that it needs to be told, and to not ask for permission from anybody else.
I think that's great advice. Beth, you're working on yours as well. Do you have any advice you want to add or things that you're learning along the way?
This will be my 4th book, and it is not any easier than the other 3. And so the advice I have this time around is different from the other ones, and it would be to allow yourself to get into the emotional space that you need to get the writing done. And I decided that I didn't quite believe in procrastination. I do think it's a real thing. I didn't quite believe in writer's block, although I still think that's a real thing too. What I believe instead is that we avoid because we're not ready. And whatever we can do to get ourselves ready, to give ourselves that permission to feel ready is what we need to do, and then the work emerges.
Lovely.
Yeah, I think that's great, Beth. Just to add on, because you reminded me of another point I wanted to make, which is that oh God, I forgot what it is.
That's okay. If it comes back to you, interrupt me again. Totally fair. Please do. This is your conversation, your event.
Sorry.
No, this is good. Louise says, grew up on the same block as you and your family. How did your parents feel about the book when it came out?
Oh, that's a good question. So my parents, for a long time, they didn't believe that I was a writer. I told them I was a writer, and they would go to Temple and tell their friends that I was studying to become a doctor. I said, no, I'm actually majoring in fiction. I'm going to be a writer. And the process of writing this memoir it took about 7 years, and 8 years to publication. And when they finally held the book in their hands, I could just feel, not just a sense of pride, but also a sense of relief, because they're like, oh, she wasn't lying all these years. But yeah, it's just been incredible to see their reaction and to see how deeply moved they are that this book has been written, to honor them and to honor the love that they have for me and the love that I have for them. And it's just been really wonderful.
Absolutely. That leads us into this next question really well. There was a turning point in your book where you move unapologetically forward rather than letting yourself be defined by the past. How has that impacted your relationship with your family?
I think it has impacted it in the sense that because I was, it was very easy for me to fall into this loop of blame and guilt and shame, especially for all the things that I had endured as a child. But to make that, again, that pivotal decision to drop out of college, I was essentially able to remove myself from that loop. And that has allowed me to cultivate this really beautiful relationship with my parents, and it's allowed me to cultivate compassion and forgiveness. And it's been just so essential to my journey towards healing.
No, that's really great to hear. These are such good questions here. As a memoirist, is there any area of your life that you felt was too personal to put out there? Were there moments of hesitation and in the editing process, maybe, or even in the writing process?
I think I went all in. I think I might have overshared, if anything. um, yeah, I wanted to just tell the truth. For anyone who was willing to listen, I just wanted to say, this is my story, all of it. And obviously, when you're writing a memoir, there's a narrative structure, there's a narrative arc. So there are quite a few chapters that did not make it into this memoir. But that has more to do with just following that through line, and making sure that I'm always hitting those major motifs and themes that I set out to write about.
No, absolutely. How did you decide what picture to put on the cover?
I actually did not make that decision. I approved it though, but I sent the wonderful team, the wonderful art team at Scribner. I sent them my, just like a portfolio of photographs, and they sent me back about 12 different designs for covers, and so this is the one that made the cut.
That's awesome that you got to approve it. I'm sure, Beth, as you know, that's not always the case. Even sometimes it's just like, here's your cover, go, and that's pretty cool. Yeah. So, okay, here's another great one is, what does your writing process look like, and what are you going to work on next?
Okay. Writing process. I wish I had like a really enlightened answer for this, but I mean, I basically spent 7 years in the corner of my room crying, like pulling my hair out, and just, they say like, usually when you start out, you look for moments of inspiration, and that's when you write. And a master, when you go pro, you just sit down and you write. You a lot, like 15 minutes every day, and you just sit down and you write. So I clearly did not go pro. I'm very much an amateur. But hopefully for my next book, this is a great segue for my next book. Hopefully for my next book, I can actually do that. But I'm currently working on a fictional account of a historical event. So this will be based in 40 AD. It's, first of all, when I was younger and people asked me where I was from, and I would say Vietnam, a lot of them would say, oh, you mean like the Vietnam War? And that always stuck with me. I thought, oh gosh, do people just view Vietnam as this, as synonymous with this war?
Mm-hmm.
And so in this next book, I would like to sort of take readers on a ride to, or get their attention towards a different war, actually. And this is a war that happened in 40 AD. And this is after millennia of Chinese domination. And these two Vietnamese sisters, known as the Trung sisters, I see Beth, yeah, every Vietnamese person knows this story. But they join the Vietnamese army, and together they rise up in the ranks, and they lead the first successful revolt against China to take back Vietnam's independence. And they reigned from 40 to 43 AD as the queens of Vietnam. Yes, exactly.
Okay,
You did not end well.
White person. What? That's so cool. Thank you for writing the book so that we can know about that badassery and that kind of history. That's amazing.
Exactly.
Right, where's their movie?
It ends poorly. That's why.
Oh, well, okay, well, that's good to know on that front. I'll still read it. I don't always need a happy ending, but that sounds amazing.
Yeah, I mean, there's only, I think there's like one primary source in the world. So as a writer, it's like wonderful news because it means I can really, be as creative as possible to build out that story.
Yeah, that's amazing. Beth, do you want to add anything about your writing process? So, we obviously have people who are wanting to know a little bit more about craft here, but what about for you? What does your writing process look like?
Well, I think all I could add is that writing processes can change. And I think that is an important thing to keep in mind, because sometimes people feel like if they're not doing something the way they used to, that they're messing up. And I don't think that's true. I think it's just your process can change with the book. And sometimes the book and the project decides for you, or your life circumstances do. Like after I had children, my whole writing process changed dramatically. And now I do write. I used to write sort of like huge blocks of time in the middle of the night. And I absolutely cannot do that anymore. And I write when I can, and I can write with more distraction around me. And but it took me a long time to get to that point. And it was very frustrating because I had to realize, okay, this changes, like my whole life has changed. Of course, my writing is going to change too.
I think that's such an insightful comment, and it's something that not everybody thinks about. Like you said, people think I've got to do it this same way, or I've got to do it the same way.
Like every day. I don't write every day.
No. Say that again to the backseats rows. She doesn't write every day. That's okay. You still have 4 amazing books, and that's awesome. So
that makes me feel so much better. Thank you, Beth.
I think more writers need to hear that. We're tired of that old adage that's like, oh, I write every day, 500 words at this point in time. No, everybody does it different. Thank you both for confirming that. I want to read one more comment and then ask one more question here. I believe this person's name is Carrie, but it might be different. But it says, "Thank you, Ly, for being such a bright light always. Your kindness helped me get through so many difficult days when we were in high school together, and I'm so proud of you." So that was such a wonderful comment from someone. It was Carrie A89 is the username.
Oh, I think I know who that is.
Okay, that helps. I was like, I don't know, that doesn't have a name, but yay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And so the last question that we'd like to ask here at Tattered Cover, and I mentioned it to you, both of you, before we hit the record button, hit the live stream button, but it's for both of you. For Beth, you as a reader. For Ly, you as the writer of this book. But what did House of Sticks teach you? And I'd love to start with Beth and then move to our author of the hour here this evening. So Beth, what did House of Sticks teach you?
Well, first, thank you so much, Kaylee, for doing all this and for facilitating, and for everyone for asking questions. This was so fun for me. And Ly, thank you for this beautiful book. This book taught me a lot. And while I was reading it, I couldn't help thinking about where I was when you mentioned certain years, like 2007, 2009. I was seeing our parallel lives in a weird way. And in so doing, thinking about how hugely, vastly, wildly strange it is to have ended up here, as both of us in refugee families from Vietnam, but also how wildly different the refugee experience is. And I think too many times, readers in America might think that the refugee experience is all the same, or like immigrant experience is the same, but there's so much proof that that's not true. And the fact that we have these sort of parallel lives and parallel experiences, and yet wildly different ones, because, I grew up in the Midwest, and yet, still share so many common things tying us together, like Buddhism and like our dads. It made me feel such a deep connection to what it means to be Vietnamese, what it means to be Vietnamese American, and how important it is to keep writing and reading, and what a pleasure and privilege it is to read new work and to know that, this is what it's all about, being in this business. Not just our own work, not just our own writing, which is fun and important, but the fact that it connects us to writers and allows us the chance to do something like this and to see, these beautiful words, enter the world and therefore, affect us all and make us better people. So thank you.
Thank you. That was so beautiful, Beth. Oh my gosh. And I'm so honored to have you here chatting with me tonight. I've been such a big fan of your work for so long. And so it's just such a privilege to be here with you tonight. And to have had you read my words and to share your reaction. I think for me, I think one of the most important lessons I learned was um, kindness towards myself. And it's something that was so difficult for me to be for so long. And in writing this memoir, I was able to really honor my humanity. And by doing so, by being able to be kind to myself and coming or writing the story from a place of compassion, I was able to honor the humanity of all the characters that I write about. Um, and I also wanted to connect not just the characters in my book, not just people who look like me, but I wanted to just reveal the universality of our condition as human beings on this earth. And I think connection is something that I've sought after my entire life, and it's a major theme in this book. And I feel that through the gift of words, I am able to spread my roots and really connect to others. And it's been so wonderfully gratifying to see and experience.
Well, and I think you've done a wonderful job with this book, House of Sticks, which if you have not gotten your copy yet, you can do so at tatteredcover.com or at any one of our locations. It really is a very it's a wonderful book, and I don't know any other way to say it. It seems small to say those words, but I really mean them. And I think that people need to make sure that they get their copies and that they read this book and share it with people as well. And so, Ly, thank you so much for this gift you've given us in the form of House of Sticks. Thank you for your time tonight, Beth. Thank you as well for your amazing questions. I want to give each of you a chance to remind people who you are, where they can find you online, and anything else you want to say before we end tonight. And once again, Beth, I'm going to have you kick us off and end with Ly Tran, author of House of Sticks.
Oh, you want us to remind you of
just like who you are, where they can find you online, any other like last minute things you want to say?
Sorry, that was a really existential question for me. Like, who am I? Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm actually I'm on social media. Okay. I'm on as Beth Nguyen on Twitter and Instagram. And yeah, I love doing these events and I love independent bookstores. So that's like the main thing I want to say. So thank you. And I love reading new books. So thank you.
Hi. And Ly?
I'm Ly Tran, author of House of Sticks. Wow, it's so awesome to say that. Yay. You can find me on lytran.me. It's totally an amateur website. I have no idea how to do any of this stuff. So I apologize for the state of that poorly designed website. And you can find me on Instagram. My handle is @ending4adverbs. And if you don't know why, it's because my name is an ending for adverbs. LY is, it's a super nerdy moment. I apologize.
Sorry, I'm having an English literary nerd moment over here because that's the greatest Twitter handle for your name. That's so smart. Oh, that's great.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm having trouble now. Now I'm having a crisis over just cleverness. It's amazing. And I'm McKaylee with Tattered Cover Bookstore. You can follow us online at Tattered Cover, which is our handle everywhere, or go on tatteredcover.com. More importantly, go on there to get your copy of House of Sticks by Ly Tran. Ladies, if you'll stick around while I close this out here, thank you all again for joining us. Thank you for supporting local independent bookstores. We would not be here without you. Indies, love your support, and shopping local means more to us than you'll ever know. So thank you all again. Stay safe, everybody, and happy reading. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.